earliest family history that has been lost in the mists of time are your roots in the colonial period, your family's roots in the colonial period in this country. But I guess the beginning of noted history was a great-great-grandfather of yours who traveled from Connecticut to Ohio.
Yes, I remember my grandfather, my father's father, talking about his grandfather who came to Ohio from Connecticut. This was a time where it was probably at the time when the town I grew up in, Worthington, was settled in 1803. It was around that period. But beyond that, I don't have any family conversation about what happened. There was nothing recorded other than a variety of things along the way that would indicate the times they lived there. In terms of the other side of the family, the Michaels, my mother's parents, there's something like a discharge from the Union Army during the Civil War, which would indicate that somebody was there at that time. And most of my experience goes back to my grandparents and their description of their family, their immediate family, their mothers and fathers, and the great uncles that I had. But they settled for the most part in central Ohio in very small towns, like the town I grew up in, Worthington, which when I grew up was really very small, like only something like 2,000 people who lived there. It's on my mother's family. Let's see, there was one would be my great-grandmother who came to Ohio from Ireland, and that would be probably in the late 1800s. But beyond that description of history, almost everyone else had just been there, just been around. Nobody talked about their previous experiences because it was not relevant to their lives at that time.
How is it that so there are some place names that have Darby in central Ohio?
Well, there's Darbyville, I think, in central Ohio. There are two small creeks. There's an upper Darby Creek and a lower Darby Creek, which I suppose describe the boundaries of the country, either the farms or the places where these people lived when they first came to that area.
The original Ohio ancestors were farmers then?
Probably farmers. That maybe small tradesmen, or I know that beyond that there was no description other than photographs of old farms where people had lived and grown up.
So tell us about your father's parents.
They, as I experienced them, were at one time farmers. I think my father lived on a farm when he was very small. And then during their early days, which were probably early 1900s, moved into Worthington and lived there. And one time they had a small restaurant. Another time they had another small business. From the time I remember them from, like, beginning in the 1930s on, I remember one grandfather was a construction supervisor on a construction crew where they were building houses around the communities. And the other grandfather, I remember, who was for a while a mayor of the town, who was at one point was on some kind of township commission, that kind of thing. I mean, I don't remember them actually working. I mean, I don't remember the experience of seeing them doing whatever it was they did. To me, they were somebody who existed only when I was around on a visit.
What year was your father born?
It was 1898, I think. And he was born, as I say, on a farm, and his family was I had two children. My uncle Hayes my father were the only two children that my grandparents had. And they grew up primarily in a small town. Went to the local high school, and grade school, which I later went to, and my sister went to. And grew up, I guess, as a kind of unruly schoolboy who was a typical redhead kind of high-spirited bad boy, whereas his brother, my Uncle Hayes, was more studious and more careful about his behavior and kind of did a lot better. But he, as I remember, the description was after he left high school, for a while went to medical college with the intention of being a doctor, which at that time was outside of Columbus. And I think he spent 2 years in training, and then that was early in the 1910, 12, and at that time was the time of the First World War. And he was immediately enlisted in the Army at that time.
Before we go into that, why don't you show us the pictures of your grandparents?
Okay. This is a picture of my father's mother, my grandmother Darby, who lived a couple blocks from where I grew up. And I would spend a lot of time in the winter, particularly, visiting them and sliding on a sled down the hill beside their house. And then after being out in the cold, we would come in and have hot chocolate out of a very nice china pitcher and cups, which I still have here, which I remember as being very important to me. And this is my grandfather, and this is the way he looked when I knew him as a child. And they were both kind of more traditional, more like grandparents, more reserved and more, I guess we would call them kind of more respectable and more formal.
This is your grandfather and grandmother Darby?
Right.
How about the Michaels?
Okay, my mother's family. Here we are. It's kind of hard to look at, but this is probably one of the 2 or 3 pictures I have of my other grandfather. He didn't like to have his picture taken at all. It was, for some reason, never explained.
Who's the baby?
Okay, that's me. As you can see, so that's what he would look at by the time in my early childhood. The other pictures down here of my grandmother, probably at the same period. Her name was Annie Bell Michael, and my grandfather's name was Charles Peter Michael, for whom Galen's named. His middle name is Peter also. But they were also, I spent a lot of time with them. They lived 2 blocks in the other direction from where I grew up. And they were more jolly and more interested in joking around and having a good time. But both grandparents were very loving and a big part of my life.
You spent regular time with your grandparents?
Not exactly regular time, but I remember spending time, for instance, when my mother would be away, I'd be visiting them, or as I grew up, I would be going down there particularly after school. We would have holidays there. We would go there for dinner frequently on Sundays. With the other grandparents, we'd go visiting and spend like a Sunday afternoon, or go there and have dinner. In particular, she made special things like fried chicken was her specialty, and she made honey and biscuits. And we would spend time when she would make grape. She'd pick grapes in the grape arbor and would make delicious grape juice. I remember drinking lemonade in the summer. We would go down and swing on the swing in the front porch and drink lemonade in the evenings, or have watermelon. And the neighbors would come by, and we'd spend a summer evening talking and chatting and making jokes and occasionally singing. She would also like to play the piano and sing, and would try to teach me how to play the piano. And she would play piano and I would sing, and she would be wise enough to get all the local all the popular songs of the period, which would encourage me to be interested in the music she was playing.
Let's back up a little bit because I interrupted you when you were talking about your father interrupting his medical education to go into the First World War. He enlisted rather than was drafted.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think he would describe his experiences?
In the war, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Well, he never did to me, but according to my mother, it was a very terrible thing, and that he was changed a great deal by the experience, and it did a lot to him emotionally. And afterwards, they had been married a few years. I had maybe just 1 or 2 years, actually. And she said that he was really a completely different person when he came back from the experience.
So they were married before he went off to war?
Yes, actually, they were married when he had been in the Army for a short period of time. They had been engaged for a number of years, but as I recall, they were married when he was stationed someplace in the South. And in fact, she went down to visit him, and his mother went down too, and they were married at some kind of a civil ceremony there. I think it was in Alabama, where he was stationed at the time.
But he did ultimately go to France.
Oh yeah, yeah. He was sent overseas. I think the whole extent of the time in the overseas, I think, was just a little over a year. The actual experience of the Americans in that war was not very lengthy, but it was a very intense year or two that the Americans spent during that war.
How soon after his return were you born?
Well, I was not born until something like 12 years later. My mother had finished teacher's training school in Columbus and been teaching for several years. And I think, in fact, it was something like 12 years that she was continuing to teach, and my father was working at that time in some kind of accountants. It's an accountant in Columbus, Ohio.
Did your mom also grow up in Worthington or that area, or?
Yes, she also. I mean, they knew each other when they were in high school, and she grew up in Worthington, and so did her sister, my Aunt Ellen, and she also had a third sister, Nellie, who died when she was, I guess, about 16 or 18 of pneumonia, which at that time was a very serious disease.
Willamette was the middle sister.
No, she was actually the oldest. Aunt Ellen was the middle one, and Nellie was the youngest who died. But
during your childhood, all of your grandparents and aunts and uncles still remained in more or less immediate
well,
area?
my Aunt Ellen, who was my mother's sister, was in Worthington all the time during my childhood, and in fact lived there until she died. My father's single brother, I did not know as well because they lived first in northern Ohio and then in Pennsylvania, and would come back only once a year for visits. So I knew him much less well. But because my Aunt Ellen lived with my grandparents, I spent a lot of time with her, and she was almost like somewhere between an older sister and a young aunt in my experience.
And her name accounts for your middle name?
Right. That was named for her.
What kind of relationship did you have with your aunt besides this older sister relationship?
Well, she was a very happy, jolly person. She was, when I was aware of what she was doing, she was a librarian at Ohio State University Library, and she would be away all day, and I would be very happy to see her coming down after work. And she would be see her coming down the streets and run out to meet her. And she would frequently spend time maybe shopping in Columbus on the weekend, and she would always bring me a present when she came back. I was always glad to see her coming with something special she would have for me. Because she never married and never had any children of her own, I guess both my sister and I had a lot more attention from her. And she would take me to the movies. She was a big movie buff. And when I got old enough, we would go down on a Saturday afternoon to see a movie at the local neighborhood where we